Welcome to The Empty Canvas, the podcast about how creativity begins. I'm the host, Pascal Anson, and my guest today is photographer Talie Eigeland. Welcome.
Good to see you again.
Yes, been quite a while, 5 years, I think, since.
Yep, something like that. I dread to think.
Yeah. I'm really curious to talk to you today on The Empty Canvas about this idea of starting as a photographer. I haven't done much preparation, but I have been thinking about it. So I think in my head, I want to ask you some questions about physical preparation, like what kind of kit you need, what stuff you need, and how you make sure you've got the right stuff. Then also, I want to ask you about vibe. Like, how you create in a studio the right vibe to get the best from your subject, which is kind of, I guess, the empty canvas.
Yeah.
So I suppose there were some little secrets in there, but I'm really curious as to your working method, because I know a few photographers, and I think that thing of setting the right tone at the beginning of a shoot is like, when people do that well, it's amazing. And then when people don't do it well, it's tense and weird. How do you go about setting those kind of expectations or that vibe in the studio?
I actually still get quite nervous before every single shoot, and I've done countless shoots now, but there's very little preparation in terms of gear. I'm very, very minimal. I'm not about the gear at all. It just needs to not cause me problems, basically.
But how do you make sure? Yeah, that's like the nightmare for a photographer, right? Or a videographer.
Yeah.
Is something not being there or not being charged
or not working or something. My camera recently, I hit the max shutter count, and thank God I was at home. I hit 183,000-ish, but the shutter it has a lifespan.
Oh.
And this is something that hadn't happened to me before, and it happened mid-shoot. And thankfully, my housemate had a backup, but I thought if this happens so we're prepared.
183,000?
In about 2.5 years. It's a lot of photos.
I thought I took a lot of photos.
It's a lot of photos. They go fast when you shoot live music, but also in portraits I shoot a lot. But it's really more about vibe than about gear, although I do love lighting, very into my lighting.
Yeah, we can maybe get onto that. So so what I'm hearing is that you have quite an agile setup in terms of there's not lots of kind of infrastructure there in the studio.
No, there's
Have you boiled that down less and less and less to be a few really important things?
Yeah, so it's always the same camera and lens. Every once in a while start expanding out, and then I realise I don't use any of it, and then bring it back in, and then every couple of years I'm in a period of I'm going back out now. So
what does that look like then when you're saying you go back out?
I've just bought a new lens.
Okay.
Which is a 35mm, more cinematic. I realise I'm doing everything portrait now. I think Instagram probably doesn't help. Probably, yeah, and I do gravitate towards portrait, but I'm realising
So you're a portrait photographer?
I am a portrait photographer.
But
what about a cinematic horizontal portrait? And I'm sort of starting to limit. It is what comes naturally to me, but sometimes a new piece of kit does make you think about things differently.
Yeah.
Or it might be a new light, a new setup, like a new backdrop. But I do most things just against the living room wall, and I just light it really differently.
Isn't that interesting about portrait format? Because I remember probably like a long time ago, maybe 25 years ago, seeing a portrait computer screen.
Interesting.
Because I suppose even though computers, they're kind of square, but they are actually landscape rather than portrait, more or less. But this was properly like an A4 sheet of paper portrait.
I've never seen that.
No, but like, why is that not? Because most computer screens, even now, are not portrait, are they? They're a landscape.
Yeah.
I guess when you edit, you've got a landscape.
I've got a load of spare space at the sides most of the time.
Maybe that's something that will change. I don't know.
We're all moving towards phones, aren't we? But yeah.
Okay, so you've got a lens that's kind of changed your outlook.
It's arriving. I've ordered it.
Got it yet.
It's coming.
Okay.
It was my gift to myself. I thought, let's try something new, because you do get stuck in patterns, and I've just redone. I've been through my whole archive. It's great we're having this conversation now. So I've really gone through what's your process been in the 10, 15 years you've been shooting, and it's like, okay, it's time to snap out of that bit now. Is
that because you kind of have got experience / comfortable in a pattern that is successful?
Kind of in terms of setup and lighting, and it's all gone I keep gravitating towards this really colourful stuff, which is sort of bizarre because look at I don't quite know where that comes from, but my work's got really colourful and it's got a little bit out of control. So I sort of want to flip that now and maybe do something more cinematic and a bit less colourful and kind of regain control over it.
It's interesting, the saying that you've been working for 10 or 15 years, because I've been speaking to a range of people. Some people who are just starting out, like literally graduated 2 or 3 years ago. And some people that have been working for a long time, like 30 years.
Yeah.
And I feel like 10, 15 years, sort of in the middle of that somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you've got to a point, or I'm hearing that you've got to a point where you're looking for new ways to start maybe, or new...
I'm looking for a bit more now. It became very clear to me when I went through my archive. It's been so much about the vibe. And to come back to your earlier question, I'm really finicky about setting up the atmosphere. So it's kind of tricky because I live with a fantastic housemate who I love very much. But so when there's people, external influences, people coming and going, I find that really disturbing because it's quite an intimate process. And I quite often have people who maybe aren't really, they might be performers, but they might not be used to having their picture taken. Or it might be someone who's going through something. I'm really lucky to work with lots of really interesting people in situations. So all it takes is someone to kind of close a door a bit and you kind of snapped out of the moment.
Right. So it's almost like a bubble that you're trying to create.
It's kind of a bubble.
Yeah.
But I've realized a lot of what I've done has been about the process. It's actually been quite therapeutic. It's very much about the vibe between you and the person and what you can sort of draw out of them and all that. And I've realized you can't always see that in the final result, or at least you might be able to see it, but the industry cares about how you present and curate that. And I think I need to find a way to make that process more evident in the final result.
But that's like a sort of magic, isn't it? It's something like unquantifiable, that sort of magic spark that you can maybe see.
Yeah.
Or not see, or maybe those things are evident when it's not there more. When you look at somebody, you're kind of like,
that's
they've
flat.
got
There's
no dead eyes.
Yeah. And I can see that in different, sometimes I do shoots where it's kind of for purpose and it might still be a great shot.
Yeah.
But, and it's interesting actually, having been photographed, especially in the band, some photographers will really put the effort into drawing something out of you, whereas others are all about the lighting and the technicality. And they'll create an amazing photo and it'll from afar.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just don't care. I don't know. It's a fantastic photo and they do stuff with kit that I could never, or wouldn't necessarily even be interested in doing, but it's a brilliant result. But I sort of know there's nothing going on in that moment, which for me that's not what I'm after.
No, but this is so interesting because I think that's chemistry and it's about your talent, not only as a kind of technical setup person, but in terms of that chemistry that you have with your subject and the person that you're trying to portray, who you might have only met a few minutes previously.
Yeah.
How do you set up that atmosphere? Is it by how you talk? Is there music playing? Is there soft like what happened? How do you get that?
Something I think a lot about, and I'm gradually. That is, I mean, there are a few things that I do, sort of like make sure the space is nice and tidy, and I try to have some sort of music on when they come in and make them feel really welcome. But it's kind of about your frame. I've realised you can do a lot with nothing really. It's about how you manage to interact. It's always the fear of the empty canvas. The canvas is never empty because people are never empty. There's always lots going on. I'm really fascinated by people, but it's the fear of not being able to access that or not creating the environment that allows them to
relax or be themselves. I was thinking about this actually when I was thinking about today and talking to you about when photographers photograph somebody super famous like Barack Obama.
And they've done it a million times.
No, it wasn't that. It was more like, you've got 5 minutes with this person.
Yeah.
And so they're coming in with whatever's been going on in their head. And you, as a photographer, have got to have everything ready so that you can just get to that point super fast, because you don't have the luxury of 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is. But it's interesting that I didn't want to put words in your mouth when I asked that question about setting up an atmosphere, a good atmosphere to work in. But it's interesting that you think about it.
And you've got to be able to do it. I mean, I have the luxury of doing stuff in studio a lot, but sometimes it is a case of you've got to grab a portrait, or you're on an event shoot and
You've got a what portrait?
You've got to grab a portrait,
grab a portrait,
or someone's there and the client goes, "Can you go get a portrait of someone quite famous?" And you've got to pull it out of a hat somehow.
That in that situation, I can imagine that's sort of charm because it's not set up. I wanted to ask you about that. That was actually going to be my initial question about when you, as an artist, are planning to take a portrait, as opposed to when you're being asked to take a portrait of somebody as a job. How do those two differ in terms of your kind of startup process?
Do they differ? I suppose one of them I have time to stress about and the other I don't, but what I actually end up doing is probably the same.
Which one do you stress about?
Well, if I don't know I'm going to have to do it, I don't have time to worry about it. It just happens.
Is that the thing where somebody goes, "Can you
just do it?" And in a way, well, you might not get such an interesting photo because you can't set it, you don't have your perfect environment. But in terms of what actually happens with the person, it's not necessarily any worse. Like when I do my own shoots or that there is planning, I spend a lot of time. I'm not quite sure what, because I don't really plan. I don't plan anything really. I sometimes pretend to plan and show them some stuff because you've got to gain confidence.
Pretend planning, what's that?
Well, it's sort of quite, especially if you have a team or you've got styling or makeup, you've got to go, here's the direction. Yeah. But in actual fact, I know probably most of that's going to go out the window because I have no way of knowing what that person's atmosphere is going to be like until they're in front of me, sometimes even through the camera. So I kind of just roll with it. I mean, sometimes you do have a direction, sometimes but it makes me really badly suited to stuff like fashion and where you've got lots of people around you, but also you've got to go, here's the mood board, and it's useful to have a loose mood board because it gives you a starting point. But ultimately, I know I'm going to stray from that probably entirely.
So how do you prepare in terms of ideas? So if we can imagine that you've got an appointment with somebody who's going to come to your studio and you've done a bit of background research on them, but you haven't met them before, but there's a little bit of direction there. But what does the kind of sketching look like beforehand?
Pinterest.
Really?
Pinterest is still, I try to get people to send me, I want to see.
What, you ask them to send you?
I ask them to send me, if they're a client, so it's for them, then I'll ask them to send me some things that they like.
Sure, so that's the client briefing you. I was more...
When it's me.
Yeah, when it's you and you've got somebody who you know a little bit about and you're thinking, maybe you've seen some other photographs of them and you think, well, I want to do something different. I want to do something new. How do you sketch that? How do you kind of experiment with what that might look like?
It happens quite naturally. That's probably the main homework that I do is I'll go and look at what they've shared. Yeah. Also things that have been taken of them. If they're that kind of person, they've got a bank of, and I'll kind of contrast what's been taken of them, what I can see with what they've chosen to portray and maybe self. So it's always quite interesting to see how they are out in the world versus what they select. So you kind of get some information there. And then I tend to figure out somehow what my idea of them might be. But of course, you don't know until you've actually into it. But you sort of form some kind of idea. Or maybe if it's a shoot I've planned, there's probably a reason why I was interested in photographing them in the first place. Yeah. So I'm kind of looking to draw that out, whatever it is. It's sort of an atmosphere more than any physical. It's not I want them to look like X. It's like I'm sort of perceiving something about them that I'm interested in honing in on.
That sounds quite subtle. That almost feels like something like an aura or something that you feel you want to see if you can draw out or bring to the image that you're creating.
Which is quite ambitious.
But that's very interesting that you're saying it's not like I want to make it look like this image. Or this thing. Well, I mean, I've talked to designers on this podcast about referencing other things to do with your craft and what you reference to help you. Yeah. But I'm really interested in the fact that you very explicitly said it's not about necessarily that visual, but it's about something
Yeah.
a little bit more invisible, which
Yeah.
when as I'm talking to you sounds strange because a photograph is incredibly visual as a representation of somebody.
Yes, and that's kind of the realization I've had. I need to maybe emphasize the visual outcome a little bit more.
So what does your setup look like? If I walked into your studio, what would I see in terms of setup?
You'd be quite underwhelmed actually, because it is a living room. There's a big plain wall that's sort of a light, kind of sandy, greyish pink colour, which
Like
is
this?
a whole other story. Slightly darker.
This is very flesh coloured.
Yeah, it's a nice wall. Slightly pinker, which was a total accident. That's another story. But actually, it's turned into a really good base because I do so much with light anyway that I could start with pretty much any colour wall.
Okay,
Not as bright green, but so I shoot most things against that wall. I do have a pop-up backdrop as well if I really want something black or grey, like something really
What's a
different.
pop-up backdrop?
It's sort of a like those tents that you just
Oh yeah. So you can never ever get back
hope
into
for
the
the
same
best,
shape.
yeah.
You have-
same deal.
Do you do that as well, where you have to like watch a YouTube video about how you then grab it and then do this thing to get it back into the circle?
So I've put it out and now it just stays out because
It's never ever going to go
I'll
back
probably
into
never
the
get it back in.
That I'm sure that video, that guy that did the how to put the pop-up tent,
Yes.
he must be a millionaire with the amount of views that's had, because honestly, difficult.
I hope he's doing advertising.
Yeah, but there's lots of things like that on there. The reflectors are also a bit like that, where
Yeah, don't bother with those. You'd see 3 lights. You see one big kind of round soft. I've switched to continuous lighting. I was always flash before.
Okay.
For gear people, I found once I went mirrorless, continuous kind of worked better with that. So I've got one big kind of soft round thing and 2 slightly less powerful that I can shape, and I tend to put colours on them and
by shape, do you mean it's got the?
It's got those it's got a
barn
grid
doors.
on it which narrows the light and doesn't
right.
let it go everywhere, and then it's got barn doors, so I just leave them up like that. They're by a brand called Harlow, who are really cool. They're very pretty lights. You can leave them up and they're not offensive.
And they look like something kind of decor.
They've made them look kind of like vintage cameras. Yeah, they're really nice. Whereas every other light I've had before, I would tuck away because they looked horrible.
That's funny because that's funny you say that, because I feel like maybe 3 or 4 years ago there was definitely a vogue for people having tripod lights in their living room with a kind of dish on the back and a kind of reflector bulb.
Yeah.
But like from John Lewis or something. Not.
Yeah, I've seen. They have them in photo studios quite a lot.
Yeah.
Big old thing in the corner.
But that sounds like these things. We'll find a photo of those. They sound quite good if you can leave them up.
Yeah, they're really pretty. So they're actually they probably set the tone more than anything else when you walk in.
So yeah, that's interesting. I think about this idea of working in your living space, because I think a lot of people think that portrait photographers or fashion photographers there'll be a big kind of like white studio with a big kind of infinity backdrop and lots of people rushing about.
I mean, that is nice, apart from the people rushing about.
I'm getting the sense that the fewer people, exactly.
The fewer people, the better. I mean, I do it, and there are times when I've done bigger shoots with editor with full crew, and I can do it. And actually, it's really fun when you do it, but it's not what I naturally am pulled towards. It is more intimate, one-on-one. Even makeup, I sort of have mixed feelings about. It can be really nice, and obviously adds something to the shoot, and it can often make the person feel more comfortable. And so I'm not against it, but it's quite nice when you're shooting to. It's very conversational as well. It's much less.
And how far away from the subject will you be?
Really close.
So very intimate, very in your
I'm
pocket.
notoriously I really like the 3-dimensional. I want you to feel like you're there. So if I can have something coming towards the camera, or I'll distort slightly.
The viewer is there.
Yeah, I want it to be very immersive. It really is what is going on in that moment. So I tend to be
Close.
almost invasively close. Is this all right? So yeah, but now with the Sony, I can actually like move it towards you without necessarily being also.
But that's so interesting, isn't it? About what we were talking about setting the right tone and intimacy and distance, because you get to a certain point with somebody that
don't know.
Don't know, but also as a subject, if you're meeting the photographer that you've never met before, and then suddenly there's like a bit of kit in your face.
Yeah, well, you don't do that first thing.
Hello, bang.
Yeah, but I do love when I get to work with people again and again. There are a few people that I've shot, and that's really nice because you get to see the evolution of their career as well.
Yeah, and there's some
people
trust
like that.
there of like,
and there's a trust there, so you
Talie
kind of
does
jump straight in,
great job,
and
yeah.
that's really nice. But I don't always do that. But that does tend to be my, and it is primarily portraits. And I do longer shots as well, but my preference is quite tight portraits.
And if we're talking about, do you shoot actors?
Yeah, they're really interesting.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and I really wanted to ask you this about actors and the blank canvas.
Very interesting chairs.
Thanks. About actors and blank canvas, because if you're shooting somebody for a band, there's some attitude that goes with it that you and they are deciding on in terms of their presentation of what they think they want to look like.
Yeah.
But with an actor, surely there's something there which is almost the opposite of that, which is like a blankness,
Yeah.
but also interesting. How do you go about drawing that out?
It's really, at the beginning, I was almost being coached by actors into what they needed. Now I've done enough of them that I sort of know what I'm aiming for.
So they would just start telling you?
I had a few experiences at the beginning where they were sort of like, okay, no, that's too fashion. This is more what we're trying. And it's like, okay, I get it now. And I have to, for me, it's like toning it down a bit because I tend to be quite creative with lighting. And although you can get away with more and more, I've noticed it used to be you've got to do really neutral. Now you can bring in a bit of, but that's really nice actually. The challenge of doing more with less. But it's a very interesting challenge because actors tend to be really great at performing, not necessarily at being themselves. So it's sometimes the greatest challenge of people who are very used to being on camera and very used to performing, and you've got to figure out how to not do that, make it look like them, which can be it's extra difficult with performers.
I thought you were going to say something else then. I thought you were going to say that they were used to being on stage, but not used to being photographed. And they wouldn't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah. Oh, they don't know what to do with themselves.
Because they're used to taking direction, right? So, there's a character that they're in, whether it's on stage or on film.
Yeah.
And they're inhabiting that character and they're being directed. And then suddenly they turn up with you and they've got to neutralise everything again. Neutralise isn't quite the right word because I guess as an actor, you're kind of like, well, I'm this is kind of the direction my personality's heading in or my age is heading in or whatever.
Yeah, especially with repeat clients, you do kind of get that, okay, that was great and now it's 2 years on and I've grown my beard out a bit and I'm pitching for slightly different roles and we need to pull that out. But sometimes you have people who come in and they've done it so many times, especially if they're a bit older or they've been in the business longer, they kind of know what to give you and how to trigger it in themselves. Or they might be trying to do something new and different, in which case you have to direct a bit more. But with younger actors or just people who aren't as experienced, you do have to put in more. But this is the thing with every shoot, I never know how hard I'm going to have to work. I never know if the person's just going to jump in and kind of, in which case my job might actually be to deviate them slightly from their plan to get something a bit different or get them enough variety or it might be they come in and they have never done it before or really don't know what to do with themselves and I'm going to have to do an awful lot, which I enjoy, by the way. That's not a complaint. But
yeah, I'm starting to understand a lot more now about this moment where people walk in and it sounds like you're using a lot of experience, but then also having to prepare for not what you expect, maybe.
Yeah, even from the moment the person walks in, you still don't know until you're looking at them through the lens.
Yeah.
I've learned that more and more. You can have an expectation and then people photograph so differently. Really, really differently.
It's interesting. My dad was a portrait painter. And when I think about his work and think about how my mum as well painted portraits of sort of like mayors of towns and sort of, friends, and she had commissions of sort of to hang in offices and stuff like that of like CEOs and stuff like that. And my dad sort of he lived in Australia, so he would paint other types of portrait, but it's also interesting that when you're painting a portrait, you're doing it over several weeks. Whereas, well, you know, you meet the person, you do a little bit,
so you get loads of different versions of them.
Yeah, and you might see them 3 times. You might see them once to start off and sort of meet them and assess everything, and then do a little bit of work, maybe work from some photos that you've taken of their nose or whatever it is. Then you might see them midway through, and then you might see them towards the end. But I think that's such a different type of process to what you're describing, which is having to make people kind of relax, but also not kind of shine or glow in this quite compressed.
Yeah, it's a real privilege. I absolutely love it.
But how did you get your personality to be like that? Because I think you've got a type of personality which is charming and makes people, you know, and friendly, that makes people relax. But not all photographers are like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is that something?
You have been photographed by me.
I have been
in very strange circumstances.
Yeah, super weird circumstances.
Not your typical.
During lockdown, with lots of like weird things going on.
Oh, we masked up and everything.
I mean, you weren't in my face. You were quite a long way away.
Yeah,
but
not my thing at all.
I have been photographed before, and the vibe has been very strange. And you know, you walk into a studio, and as a subject, you have to react to what's there, and I think I've also been very aware of the charm of the photographer, or somebody being, come on, let's just get this over and done with. And I'm wondering where that person. I suppose what I'm asking you is, are you aware?
Why am I like this?
Yeah, why are you like this? Are you aware of the personality that has got you to being a professional photographer? Can you see evidence of where that started?
That's a really great question. I suppose I've always been really fascinated with psychology more than photography. And interestingly, my dad was a photojournalist and he was interested in travel, and he was a great photographer, but I don't think that's why he took pictures.
Oh, wow.
And it's sort of similar for me. I'm a great photographer, but I don't think it's about the photo really. I never lived and breathed photos really, which I was told you have to do. You have to go to all the exhibitions. You have to assist. I never really did any of that. I was interested initially in music, and then, and at the same time in people. So it's almost an excuse to get to have that time with someone.
This is such a revelation. I'm so glad I asked that question, because I was thinking, hang on, I'm being teased here. But
no,
that's such an interesting.
And I do love photography.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but it was kind of the byproduct rather than the initial motivator.
You see, I think with my parents, they like painting more than they like people.
Interesting. Like that's probably how it's supposed to.
No, you see, I think this is what is so interesting, because I think the motivation to start something is kind of what I'm asking you about.
Yeah.
And I think I started off by, and I think your answer was like amazing actually, but I'm also curious about what that type of personality is in terms of engagement with somebody that allows you to make them feel at ease and trust you with their image.
It's always reassuring when what you like from a session is what they, or when someone uses your photo as a profile picture, you're sort of like, okay, I didn't misread them completely. That's always, because you never know, you might have liked one thing about, not liked as in you wouldn't have liked the other things, but there might have been one thing that drew you in that you were really trying to capture. And maybe for them, that was only a small part of what they want to display. So it's always very reassuring when they do use your photo as kind of a main event, because it's sort of like, oh, okay, I wasn't totally barking up the wrong tree. But I don't know, it's there's a pattern of it being quite therapeutic. All the most interesting shoots from my point of view have been, and I didn't set out for it to be this way, but I've noticed it over over the years and going back through the archive, the stuff I was doing 10, 12 years ago, it was slightly different technically, but actually the vibe was the same. It's been very consistent from the beginning. And I doubted myself and I went and did loads of other things only to come back to exactly what it started out with.
Well, I suppose there's that thing of, if it's not broke, then don't try and fix it.
Yeah,
but I'm
you're
also
kind of
hearing
told
I'm also hearing that you want to diversify your style or your
a
process
little bit. I'm trying to work out what else I can do with that main through line. But the personality thing and the main reason why you do it is something I've been thinking about a lot. And it is about the reciprocity, actually, because I talk to other photographers who have this almost voyeuristic, like they like a really long lens and they want to shoot from I'm complete opposite of that. I want to be in the moment with them. And it's very mutual. It's like the more they kind of bring stuff to the table, the more I'm quite exposed. Like it does remind me of all my favourite therapy sessions have been when the therapist has said something about themselves, and I don't like this kind of one-way system where I'm observing and taking.
Yeah.
It's like the more it can be an interaction, probably the better it's going to go.
But that's quite hard for the subject to know that, because I think you think as the subject of a photograph, you think I'm going to turn up.
Yeah.
And there's going to be this transaction that happens, and like I've got to sit there, and they're going to tell me what to do. Yeah,
it's not really what happens. It's very collaborative. I really like it to be an exchange, not I'm going to do this and you're going to. They all flow differently. There are times where it's a bit more, look that way, do that. And sometimes it can be, especially if you're nervous, a bit of direction I think is probably helpful. But the more you relax, generally, the more collaborative it becomes, and we'll look at something together and go, okay, what do we like? Is the feeling, and we shape it together, and it's really very fulfilling, and that's sort of the driving.
Yeah, I'm understanding that. That's a really good insight, I think. I want to ask about this idea of the moment, because pressing the button on the shutter is a moment.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about how this relates to music and the band that you're involved with, but also, when I look at your photographs, I know that you've got an interest in music and you're in a band, but that it seems there's so much kind of punch and rock and roll to your images that must have come from heavy metal or like something to do with like rock music. That's what I see anyway.
I appreciate the feedback.
It's an observation. It's an observation only.
It did start. I started out shooting bands just because I wanted free tickets to gigs. I think I always wanted to be a musician. Photography sort of came out of that.
How did that happen though? Because everyone goes to a music concert and they take photos now.
Yeah.
But how was that different for you, where you were like, oh no, this is the because what made me think of that was when you were saying about capturing that moment and being in that moment. Because I feel like watching your favorite band play, you are in that bubble, and there is that moment that you want to preserve and capture and keep.
Yeah.
And that is different from somebody just holding their phone and recording it, or recording themselves watching it, or whatever people do. But there must have been something with you where you were like, no, I want to do more than do that casually. I want to really do this.
I think I interpreted it. You're right, but I'd say it's less about the visual aspect and more about the intensity of the experience.
Yeah, the moment, right?
Which translates into something. But you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about it that way. I've always been drawn to quite intense things. So I suppose an ideal shoot for me is when there is a real kind of moment of connection and something happens. It's hard to describe what really, but when you forget about the fact that it's a shoot and it just becomes sort of and it's the same with music or on stage or being part of a concert. Whichever place you're coming from, there's this sort of moment where you're immersed in it and not so aware of the structure. And I think that's quite hard to do these days.
Oh, I love that. Being immersed in the moment and not aware of the structure.
Because it's so immersed, it's so overpowering. And I'm not saying every shoot is really overpowering, but you can get even just a conversation, you get so involved in a conversation, you forget about the clock ticking, you forget about, because you're really involved in that conversation. And I suppose that's what I'm seeking with a lot of different things that I do. And it's really great when it happens on a shoot. And that's when you tend to get, I was going to use a big word and say the truth. That's when you tend to get something authentic. Because if you're really involved, it's harder to shape what you look like or be aware of it. you're sort of coming out of that and just being present.
And can I ask you, when you're photographing a band, how do you prepare for that? How do you go into that situation? Because I'm kind of curious about.
In a live setting, or?
Yeah, because I think musical performance of any type is about the interaction between the audience and the people playing, and that kind of synergy. And then there's somebody else, kind of you, running
around at the front,
kind of trying to capture that, but also
trying to third wheel,
not break the spell that's there. Are you ever aware of that?
I like to get quite involved as well. In the ideal show, I am quite up close, and you've got the head of the guitar that's noticeably large in the foot because you're right in it. And I think that's what I enjoy about shooting shows. There's a lot I enjoy about shooting shows, but ideally, though, it's the same as with a portrait. It's kind of a live portrait more than concert photography. And you do both, but ideally, if I can get up sort of in it, either maybe it's a band that you know or a band that's just quite forward presenting, and you can get that depth of field where you can really feel, because most of the audience doesn't have that luxury.
Yeah,
you kind of want to be like, here it is from right in here. Or when you can get on stage or get, the drummer, because often the drummers get missed out. But that's not all there is. It's also about the atmosphere of, and the same with portraits, the atmosphere is really important as well. So my personal favourites tend to be the really up close, quite visceral. You can feel it. You can see the sweat drip at you.
Yeah.
But it's also the general atmosphere of the whole situation, which might be something a lot calmer and a lot more discreet, subtle.
Yeah, interesting. I think that describes it really, really well in terms of, I think, what I was imagining, because I'm an observer of your work, and this is an opportunity to talk to you about a little bit the mechanics of what happened, or the structure that happens behind that. So I think that's really kind of super interesting insight. Can you, just before we finish, I've got a few things I'd like to talk to you about, which is kind of, I was going to ask it in terms of this idea of before you go and you've got to kind of deal with the performance on stage, which sounds, well, I say deal with it because it feels like an environment that you're not in control of, whereas you're very in control of your studio and the lighting and...
Kind of.
Well, as much as possible, and then somebody comes in and messes that up maybe, but it feels a bit like there's a lot of variables in a rock concert that you've got to, or rock performance that you've got to capture. How do you get over that initial? How do you start doing that? Is it the knowledge that you don't just have one shot? You've got like 187,000 photos.
Too many.
You've got multiple photos to take, and one of those is going to be okay, or one you'll be able to use.
I used to be really intentional and go in, and I wouldn't press the shutter
until it was
unless I kind of, and then you might take a few of that moment, but whereas now I fall into that trap of, I resisted burst mode, it just goes click, click, click.
Yeah.
It's like I started missing moments, and as the technology gets better, the standard gets higher, and you're sort of like, okay, I'm falling behind, which if that's a choice to sort of keep it
falling behind, what does that mean?
Well, you realise people are using burst mode as default. Cameras are getting better and better in low light, so just the quality expected is going up and up and up. So if you're kind of resisting that, if you're resisting it deliberately because you want to portray it this way, that's fine. But I started feeling like I was missing moments. I did start kind of hammering a bit more.
Do you know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say, I felt like I was falling behind in the performance. So that it's going to be 40 minutes and you're like, oh my goodness, I haven't...
Quite often you get 3 songs. If you're pressed, you get 3 songs.
So that's like 9 minutes.
Yeah.
Or like 10 minutes.
Yeah, a bit longer.
It's like a really long guitar solo. Okay, so...
And there's loads of you wrestling down the front.
Yeah, that's pointy elbows.
It can be, yeah. If it's a busy one, it can be a bit.
But that's what I thought you meant when you were saying falling behind. And I was kind of curious about that, about knowing that you've got to produce something in that allotted period. That must be quite stressful. Because you start with nothing and then you end up with, how many photos would you end up with after 12, 15 minutes?
Let's not talk about that. I actually don't. Do you know what? I've steered away from gigs a little bit recently because I am going slightly more towards more intentional stuff. So I still would like to do gigs, but more curated.
It's exciting to know all these things though, because I think a lot of people just see the image, right? They just see the sweaty image with the guitar pointing at the camera. But I think that once you start actually thinking about how that image was taken, it becomes like a very different story.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we can.
But you're still sort of trying to create something though. I got turned away quite a lot, but my work is not press.
Yeah.
I am still shaping, and with a show it might be slightly more in the edit, but it is more like a live portrait or an atmosphere. It's a bit more considered.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all that. I think that's the biggest revelation for me that you've talked about this idea of moving away from an image that's in your head to capturing this moment or this kind of special connection, intimate connection with somebody. That's like, I think that's such a lovely way to think about photography, because I think I'm not a photographer, but like everybody, I take photographs.
Yeah.
And I think it's
very well.
Well, thanks. I feel like I've got some understanding of composition, but what I don't have, and I like taking pictures of people, but what I don't have is this thing of, I think the way you're explaining what's in your head when you're starting is completely different, completely different. I love that because it's...
But you're doing it now. I don't think it's that different. The process that I would go through on a portrait shoot is very similar to what you're doing as we speak.
Yes, but when I'm taking a photograph, I'm not doing that. I'm very concerned about the image, I think. I'm very concerned about what's around the perimeter, what's in focus, what's outside the frame, what's inside the frame. And
which arguably I should be more conscious of.
well, I've got a few questions to finish before, and some of these I've realised are not terribly relevant to photography, but I think they're just rapid fire questions, and I think they kind of talk a little bit about how you as a photographer work. So the first one is pencil or marker?
Pencil. Both.
See, I knew I was going to obviously ask this question, and when I was thinking about photography and pencil or marker, for me, it's not really about whether you're using a pencil or a marker.
The process is pencil, the result is marker.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Sorry.
No, please don't apologise.
I cut across you.
Analog or digital?
Digital.
Monochrome or colourful?
Colourful, but probably going to switch that.
Oh, you're entering monochrome era.
We've done too much colour.
Okay. Who's we? The world.
It's been too much colour. Needs reining in now,
okay.
I think.
All right. I've got big sketches or little sketches, but I think that's a question about size of your work. Big or small?
Let's go big.
Okay. And when how do you make notes? Do you make notes in a book, or do you make them on loose sheets or on your phone, or how do you make notes?
On my laptop usually.
Okay. And do you keep mistakes or do you bin mistakes?
Too many to keep in photography.
1,187,000.
Some of those were not mistakes.
No, of course not.
You delete the ones that are truly unusable, but I would tend to keep things that are maybes, because your eye does change when you go back to something 2 years later.
Yeah, and you're finding that out now, right? Going back to your...
So occasionally you might go, oh, that shoot actually might have had something else to uncover that you didn't see it. Because at the time you're very interested in reflecting what happened.
Yeah.
And I tend to edit very quickly. I don't sit on things. I go straight away and I flag, this is what best reflects the experience I've just had.
Yeah.
And there's no point for me waiting 2 weeks. If I'm going to wait, it's like 2 years. Then your vision has really changed.
So 2 hours or 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's or 2 minutes or two. Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Really good. Think then do, or do then think. This is really good for a photographer, this question.
Still think then do, I think.
I thought you were going to say do then think. Absolutely fine. Creative chaos or calm order?
A lot of these are both creative chaos or calm order. Calm order until it's actually happening.
Okay.
Where I'd
With a
also
bit of energy
reverse
and-
the do
yeah.
then think.
Background noise or silence when you work?
Background noise.
Yeah, you sort of answered that already. And do you think that your work's finished even when you've taken a photograph of somebody or never finished? Big question, though, isn't it? When we think about photography. But how do you feel?
How would you define work, that particular?
I don't know. Do you when you look at this work that's in an archive, do you think, well, that's closed, that's finished, or do you think, oh no, that's still open?
You got to make peace with this stuff. On the shoot, there's always a moment where you know you're done. And you'll normally always do that thing where you go just 5 minutes longer because you're like, oh, I'm going to beat that or do something. And generally, though, you know, I've got better at going, the
That's
work's
it.
finished.
Yeah.
You kind of just know.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this podcast is about starting, not about finishing. But I think there is something about, certainly when I've talked to painters or illustrators, about stopping and leaving something alone as opposed
That's
to like
harder.
kind of flogging it to death and kind
It
of
would
killing
resemble
the-
retouching probably
Yeah.
more, editing.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Reset and like, yeah. I know exactly what you mean with
Yeah.
retouching and fiddling with an image. Absolutely. Then the last question is all-nighter or up early?
I'd rather be up early, but the reality is it tends to be late. Yeah.
Okay. That's the last question. Talie Eigeland, thank you so much.
Thank you
for
so
this. It
much
was
for
really,
having
really good.
me. It was
Great.
brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you to my guest, Talie Eigeland, on this episode of The Empty Canvas. Please like and subscribe, and maybe share this with somebody that you think needs a bit of a nudge on their own creative journey. I'll see you in the next episode.